Hello, welcome back to the studio. This week we're working on reflections. That's right, how can you get those extra details into your paintings and why sometimes your reflections don't work out as well as you might hope. We'll be using a series of different techniques including underpainting and glazing. Want to know more? Stick around, let's dive in. Dive in, do you get it? Yeah, I'll stick to painting. So here's my canvas. It's a 12 by 16. I'll measure that, make sure. Yeah, see, you've got a new ruler. 12 by 16. And I've drawn a little line across here where I think there's sort of the horizon line for my painting. Now, to get us started, we need a very simple sketch. We know where the horizon line is, and I put that well towards the top. And I just want to do a nice simple sketch of the background hills. And I really just want to get maybe 1 or 2 lines in here, nothing complicated. And then I might just put a hint of those down as the reflection. So let's have a quick look. And as I always suggest, once you've actually done your reference drawings and you've kind of got everything sort of laid out, always take a stand back from your ease, have a look at this from the other side of the room, make sure you're roughly where you should be. Now, just drop that little feature in there because there's not a lot else in this area, and there's a little stand of trees there. Just like that. There you go. And that's about as complicated as I'm going to get. This is all lovely and distant. I'll make some little adjustments on here and I'll use my rubber to rub things out and move things around a little bit. I'll do this with some time lapse. So there we go. I think I've got that line drawing about right. Now, in the end, I got a bit confused as to which bit was where, and I just used my pencil just to add a bit of shading so that you sort of block in an area. And by doing that, you sort of give yourself a few sort of hard reference marks, like putting a bit of shadow in here. Definitely putting a bit of shadow in there really helped me as well. And while I was about it, I even transferred a few lines down here into the reflections. And again, I'll adjust these a little bit because I think that some of these shapes are a little bit off. Now, having got this all sort of plotted and planned out, it's time to do an underpainting. For that, I need some acrylics. I've got a wide selection of acrylic colours to choose from. I'll list them out down below, but this nice cobalt blue from a sky. We've got some burnt sienna, nice brown colours there, and some lovely yellow ochres. I've got a nice green and some Payne's grey. And I'll list out the colours I'm using down in the description. I'll also make a few suggestions in my things to buy list. They're Amazon links, so you have a look on there and pick whatever sets you think you need to use. But as a beginner, I'd suggest getting yourself a few of these acrylics. They're not too expensive, but don't go with the really nasty cheap ones. They don't work very well. They're a bit too chalky. But I'm going to put out a small amount of this, of course, on my very favourite thing to do, my little plastic plate. Have a quick look at our reference photograph. I really want to concentrate on doing something down in here, and you can see lots and lots of lovely pebbles. And just get a general idea of the sort of colours we've got. Have a quick look at my little plastic plate. You can see I've put out some white and black acrylic and a little touch of the cobalt blue colour. I'll use that for my sky as well. Remember, it's good to have colours in 2 places on a painting for some harmony. And of course, my old favourite, a piece of car sponge, just cheap silicone car sponge, which I've given a little bit of a plucking to get some nice holes in it. And black and white acrylic should be something you have, that every artist should have in their palettes, on their paint supplies, because you need to do grey canvases at the very least. And I'm going to just go for a sort of a like mid-grey colour, and I'm going to just tint it with a touch of blue. Whoops, that's a strong bluish colour. There we go, something like that. And as I say, I just want to create a nice sort of pebbly sort of texture down here, just to get me sort of going, really. And I don't care if I've got little bits of light and dark in there, because it sort of matches what's going on in here. And I'll come back again in a moment with a brush and just start adding in some defining sort of shapes and that. So something a little bit more sort of pebble-like. But right now, I just want to kill off this sort of flat grey colour. It's jolly good fun. And as I say, it doesn't take long to cover this area. I'm not particularly worried if I lose some of these lines here. I just put those on there more for sort of just an idea of where things were. I could always put the back, adding lots of little angles. I'm also going to include sort of a bit more of a bluish grey colour in here. Remember, I want sort of something to match the hills above. So I'm just going to put in a slightly brighter, more bluey grey sort of colour in here. I roughly got my pencil lines, so I can just about see them still. Not very clearly, but I can just about make them out. So if I drop that in there, then that'll do a pretty good job of giving me an idea where that reflection is. And I'll come back and work on that a little bit more with some oil paint later on. So it's not an absolute must do at this stage. Just something I'm going to drop in there just for reference. Okay, I'm going to let this sit and dry, and whilst that's drying, I might paint some of the other parts of my painting. For my background sky, I'll bring up the reference photo in the corner there. Again, I'm going to use some of this cobalt blue colour. I used it down here in the water. You can just see it on the edge of my shot there. I'm going to use some cobalt blue. It's a rich blue colour. Lovely. I'll put a little bit up there in the sky. And I reckon that's a pretty good match. Maybe a little bit more cerulean, I think, in real life, or even a little touch of phthalo blue, but I think this will work quite well. Again, I'm just using white and cobalt blue, and I'm going to just mix this up very loosely. Notice how much stronger it is right at the very top of the photograph than it is as it goes down behind a distant mountain. So again, Mother Nature, dark at the top and getting lighter at the horizon line. And again, I'm just going to blast this on. If I need to make adjustments, I can do that in the oils. That's my sky done. I can't do any more with it now. As for these background hills, again, lots more blues and greys and blacks. So just mix up a nice blue-grey colour on your brush and just block them in. We'll add detail in the oil stage. Keep looking back at your reference photograph. Don't just go blindly at it. Just keep on adding little touches of detail. Let some of the original grey colour peek through in places as well. An inordinate amount of time doing this, but it's just a case of getting some paint onto the canvas, getting rid of all of that pale grey colour there, starting to fill in some bits of detail without going too mad. As I say, this isn't probably exactly as it should be, but it's roughly in the right place. And I'll come back and I'll finesse this with a little bit of oil paint later on. And at this stage, I'm just looking to capture sort of the essence of my scene. And this is sitting in water, so I don't need it to come down very low. I need it sort of sitting with a fairly flat base to it as the rock sits down into the water. That's it. I'm going to leave this to sit and dry while I have a cup of tea. As we take a little break from the painting, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all my subscribers. And did you know you can watch all my videos for free? That's right, subscriptions are completely free. You can leave a comment and you can give me a thumbs up as well. All for free. There's lots of frees. Okay, back to the painting. That's free. Whilst the top half of our painting is drying, we can concentrate on doing some more of this detail in here. See these lovely sort of stones and pebbles, fairly flattish sort of stones. There's no sort of really big round stones, is there? So I'm going to use a brush that's sort of very flat as well. It's going to be just a series of little sort of brush strokes to sort of try and imitate some of these little shapes. Sometimes I'll use it on a corner, sometimes I'll use it on flat. Right, let's get on with this, and I think a little bit of time lapse. Before I forget, I put out some white, some yellow ochre, and a little touch more of that blue cobalt colour. my pebble area dry for a bit. I'm going to start working back up here on these hills. I cleaned off a little piece of my plastic plate with a baby wipe. It gets the paint off really nice. I put out a little tiny touch of green. I'm going to use a little touch of white. Oh, just the merest smidge of green colour. It's going to be very bright green into it. So ochre, white touch of green. Again, I'm just sort of mixing this by eye. I'm not going to be getting too scientific with it. So I want sort of like a green gold colour for my background hill. And again, I'm just going to tap a bit of this on, have a quick check. Look at the reference picture as you're doing this and say, I think that colour will probably be better on this section of my painting. So I'm going to tap it in there instead. There we go. Just work backwards and forwards. A little bit of this colour on the shoreline, I think, as well, so it doesn't go to waste. A little bit of this in here, a little bit more ochre on my brush there. It's okay, isn't it? Look at that. There's a lovely change of angle here, isn't there, where it comes over that little crest. I love those little changes of angles where your eye sees how the lay of the land changes. And again, just going to blob this on here. That's where that lovely deep shadow is. It's quite broken at the top there, quite sharp at the bottom edge there. So maybe we'll pay a bit more attention to that part of our painting. It's all broken up in here. Again, the process we're following here of just blocking in is just to cover up some of our painting, our canvas, with some colour. And it's a nice, easy process to actually sort of change the look of our painting quite quickly. And by using these sort of underpainting techniques, we gain confidence in our abilities to paint quickly. I think there is a great tendency to sit on a painting, slavishly, laboriously ploughing away at it, and losing that rhythm, that speed, the pace, because we literally get stuck painting one little tiny piece of the painting, and we lose that energy to paint with pace. And what I'm trying to encourage you to do, I hope, in this little very, very quick part of my painting, is to see how quickly you can get on with a painting. Don't dilly-dally. Don't sit there fretting over every little last piece of it, because you know what, folks? No one's going to know how much you spent working on one blade of grass here. No one knows. And worst of all, nobody cares. They just love to see the finished painting. They just love to see that you created something amazing. So think about your audience when you're painting, that you're painting for not only your own pleasure, but you're painting for the pleasure of others. And I think once you can get that kind of thought in your kind of painting process, that it's not only just for you, it's for other people to enjoy what you're doing, that I think you find the real joy of painting, that you realise that there's more to this than meets the eye, and there's more to it than just simply making a pretty painting. You're doing something that's good for the soul. Now, a bit less of Confucius. Confucius Ranson. There we go. Now, do you think I've got something that would work? Let's bring my reference up. Something in the ballpark. That's all it has to be. It doesn't need to be perfect. I reckon that's not bad. All I need is just roughly something that roughly matches that I can come back and refine with some oils. I think I just want a little bit of colour in here. Something a bit more orangey, I think. Maybe I need another colour on my plate. I tend not to put out too many, but I think maybe I'm going to need a touch of this, some burnt sienna, just a speck. I think that's it for the blocking in stage. I might sit back for a few minutes and have a look at my rocks and my pebbles and see if I need to piddle around with those too much, but I think I'm pretty much there with it. If this is all I got done for my painting, then I would be pretty pleased with it. Now, your best guess is, how long did I take to do all of this? You might be a bit surprised, but put your guesses down in the comments and I'll tell you towards the end of the painting. This is the underpainting, and I'm going to use a series of glazes to add more refinement to my painting. And as I had my water mixable linseed oil out for last week's painting, I've still got them out, and I've even got the right bottle of water mixable linseed oil this time. And what I've done is I sort of looked at my little paint box and I've picked out all the colours that pretty much match what I've done for the underpainting. So again, I've got some nice ochre, a little touch of Payne's grey, some white, and this time I've got some cobalt blue for my sky. So I'm reproducing the same colours but in oils. So now we've got the colours out and we've got the oils. Let's get on with our glazes, and I'll set this all out on a palette. Incidentally, my palette is my usual disposable paper palette, and it's Reynolds freezer paper, and you'll see some links to all of the products I'm using down in the description below. Get me started with the glazing. I put out just a little tiny drop of the water mixable linseed oil into a little dish, and the brush that I used to do the acrylics with, I've washed out and left it to dry completely, and that's the brush I'm going to be using for the water mixable oils, so that brush gets used twice over. Now, it's a little bit of a small brush for doing this. I suppose it could be a little bit bigger, but you can work in stages with this. And the idea is you want just to apply a very, very, very thin coat. God, did I say very enough? A very, very thin coat of this water mixable linseed oil. And I'm just going to come down to the waterline for the time being. And great thing is, as soon as you start adding oil on top of this acrylic, it bursts into life. It becomes really bright. Now, having set that onto there, I'm going to put out some paint on my palette, because this can take hours to dry, so we've got lots of fun time to come. If we have a look at the reference photograph, and I'll bring it up here in the corner, you can see that what I want to work on first is going to be my sky. It's the thing furthest away in my painting. Now, remember, glazes, it's really just adding a little bit to what's already there. I'm not trying to change everything completely, but I do want to create that slightly better glow at the horizon line. I just like that look. Now, I've taken my brush again. I'm going to use the same brush. I'm pretty much going to do everything with this brush, I think. And I'm just going to dry clean it off a little bit. I don't want to add any more linseed oil to my painting. And incidentally, as I say, it's just the thinnest of coats. And if you think you've got too much on there, you can always blot off a little of the surplus. But I know I've been very sparing with it, so there's actually very little excess there. It's just wet. And looking at my palette, my first three colours, titanium white, cobalt blue, which is the same blue, and some Payne's grey. And I know the blue colour isn't exactly right, but I don't have any of that colour, so I'm going to go with what I've got. As I mentioned, you can be very sparing with your colours, and you can create these sort of lovely blue glaze colours. It's a tiny bit of titanium white, tiny little bit of cobalt blue. I want that lovely bright, almost whitish blue glow on the horizon line. So taking just a little bit. And I'm not too worried about my mountain there. I can put that back in. As you see, I can just literally add that lovely glow to the sky and just blend that into the background. Look at that. You can just add that sort of that luminous look to your painting that it's so tricky to do with acrylic sometimes because it dries so fast. You don't get much blending time. Whereas here, a little drop of oils, well, you can place your heart's content. And as I say, don't worry about your edges too much. The underpainting will keep your hills or your mountains nice and safe. You won't lose anything. As I say, I'm putting this on very thin. You can see some of the effects that I had on there are still showing through. So I still got some sort of very gentle cloud effects. There's a couple of heavy brush marks there I'm not fond of. Let's put a cloud over them. There you go, disappeared. I think pretty much. No, it didn't go away completely. Let's put a cloud in there. There we go. lovely soft fluffy clouds, lovely and distant. There we go. Look at that. What a fix. You see, you really are not constrained by a reference photograph at all. It is there for inspiration, as I say, not too much perspiration. I think we just need to not sweat the small stuff too much when we're painting. So that's why I say I don't worry too much about trying to make exact matches for reference photographs, because, as I say, this is going to be hung on the wall. No one's going to see them all hanging together. And if I do something that's a little different, hey ho, it's absolutely fine. I like that misty effect. I might have to bring some of that in. So that's my background sky. I'm not going to play with it anymore, but I'm going to use some of that down in the water because there's some nice reflections of the sky. Let's get into doing our little mountain next. For this, I want to use a palette knife, I think. I've shifted my picture over to the side, so I've got room over here on the side for my reference photograph. And I'm going to be painting in this little background mountain, and I'm going to use my palette knife. Now, this is probably a bit overkill. I could easily do this with a brush, but I've got the knife in my hand, so that's all well and good. And I've got a little bit of this titanium white paint out, and little tiddly bits of colour here. Now, there's some nice bright light coming from that left-hand side there, so I'm just going to touch. A little touch of light there, a little band of light across there. I made a little bit of cobalt blue and white as well. And again, super light touch here. And we are just going to be putting in a tiny little bit of detail here. And remember, this is a long way away. I keep saying that, don't I? It's a long way off. You're not going to see very much in the way of real detail here. We're just looking for patches of light and dark, little bits of shadow, and I'm just going to let the knife touch, and where it hits and leaves a little mark, pooh, great, lovely. And that's the clue, isn't it? A little tiny piece of my painting. What? No, this probably isn't even 5% of the volume, so it means that gives you a clue as to how much time you do or don't have to spend on it. I think I probably spent about 5 minutes on this, which is 5 minutes long enough. One more little pop. That's it, done. Right, move on, next section. I'm going to switch over to a brush now just for fun, just to sort of show you what you can do. Now, before I get told off, I know this isn't strictly a glaze that I'm working on here. I'm actually using proper oil paint for this. I will be glazing later on. I'll be using a glaze. So I just wanted to sort of show you that an underpainting can be kind of nicely done. Let's put a little bit. I'm just literally using this brush. I'm instead of using a palette knife, which is hard, I just use a brush the same way as a palette knife. And you can just use it on its side and just let it kind of bump and jump and run along and just kind of create all kinds of nice effects with it. It's just lovely to use. Not 100%. It's a little bit on the murky side. If you look at the reference picture, you can see there's sort of a blue-grey colour there. And I might just add a little touch of the blue colour into there with some white. Just playing with blue greys here. I know that's a little bit brighter than the reference photograph. Again, when I look at the painting in front of me, this looks a lot darker in front of me. Let's tone that down a little bit now. This peak actually goes off into the distance here and joins onto the mountainside over in here. See, this actually becomes that. So let's make the connection. Let's put this in dark and connect it over onto that ridge there. See, I just made that connection with a nice solid line. Again, I'm not going to overwork this. I don't want this to look too detailed, because then it'll look like it's coming forward. So I just smooth all this down a little bit. Right. I think there's time for me to stop chatting and move on with my painting a little bit more. I would just drop in a suggestion of something in here, something and nothing. For my little distant hillside here, I'm going for some cad yellow, white, sap green, and again I'm going to go back to using my brush I use for the sky. It's got a little blue and white in it, it's absolutely fine. This colour is really very pale green. There's a little bit of sunshine on it, so I'm going to put a little bit of cad yellow into my mix just to give it a little bit of extra sort of colour. That's a little bit of a cool green, and add a little tiny drop of cad yellow into it. It tends to make it a little brighter, and it's very, very soft detail here. So the reason why I like using this little brush, because you can actually just tap in so much detail. I've got some nice little strands of colour going up into this hillside here. So the reason why I didn't put a great deal of paint here, again, the process sometimes is thinking ahead. So I kept all of my colour at the top of this mount up here, and I didn't let it creep down into here. I didn't start putting on thick, heavy paint, because I could see that I was going to require this part of my mountain to be a little dry, so I could get this colour to stick. As you see, I'm not really picking up anything particularly on my brush. Hardly a trace of colour. It's a little darker green into the background there, into the shadow. Again, just kind of playing with this now. You have to make a decision sometimes when you're painting as to when you are doing something constructive and when you're just mucking about. And sometimes you just might be over painting your painting. Now, I put lots of little bits of detail in here that I probably didn't need to include, but it was good fun. But I know from experience that now is the time to stop. Before I overpaint my painting and I just turn it into a pile of mud, and I might start losing stuff. I'm not adding to the painting, I'm taking away from the painting. So develop that sort of sixth sense that it says time to stop, time to walk away from my painting. And my best advice is walk away 5 minutes before you think you should do, because invariably that's the right time to leave your painting alone. And of course, I'm using water mixable oils here. So I've got some water, a few drops of dish soap in there, and just put your brushes in the water, give them a little bit of a swirl around, and don't forget, give them a nice rinse with some fresh water, and then these will take considerably longer to dry than if you wash them in some thinners. So don't try and use these brushes for a good hour or more. Well, I've fetched my little brush back nice and dry. I put out a tiny touch of ochre, a little touch of burnt sienna. I'm just talking just small amounts of paint here. I think that's the other thing to remember when you're doing these sorts of glaze type paintings, that you just need the smallest amounts of paint. You really don't need much of anything. Now, I'm just looking to overlay some colour in here. This was a little bit darker than the reference, and I'm going for something a little bit lighter. And again, on the small brush here, and this is a fairly sort of sharp line here because I think it's obviously the shadow. And you can see that with just small amounts of paint on my brush, I'm going to just texture this a little bit. Again, I'm not going to get too fiddly with it. I like these little bits poking up in here. They look like little trees and things in the distance. I'm going to leave them in. Don't take them out. Make a nice decision about how you're going to go with your painting, and then make that decision the right decision. I'm just making up a nice sort of these little trees, they look like little kind of furry mop tops, don't they? So I'm going to just try and make them go a little bit darker to make them stand out against that background between me. But you can see instantly, look at that, burnt sienna, touch of Payne's grey, and I can make myself a rich warm brown colour. And I can take that on the edge of this little brush. You can just drop yourself in some nice little tree trunks there. Right, I'm going to carry on doing a little bit more work on this. I might have to darken these up, make them a little stronger. And I'm going to use the same sort of colour to drop in a nice little shadow line there. And then we can start moving on to this section, which we haven't touched yet, but it's still dry. So, neat little tip. I've shown this on other videos, but if you take your mobile phone or a torch or a flashlight and just go across your canvas, you can see that it's just shiny. And if you see any dull spots, like there, it's a dull bit. I didn't quite get that. So I go back over it. Once again, just a thin coat. Anywhere that looks a little bit too wet, like down that edge, looks a little bit on the wet side, pick up a piece of kitchen towel, just a little dab, that'll get it back. Take a special care when you come to these horizon lines, they tend to get very wet sometimes. And that's it, ready for some glazing. Now, for this section of my painting, if you look at the reference, you see it's pretty opaque. In other words, you can't see through the water, the reflection is pretty good. So I've switched it. I've got another little flat brush. The other one's still painted. I haven't washed it. So I'm going to go into some of this paint. Oop, I need to put some more white out, I think. And again, I'm just going to lay in a small amount of paint. So this is a get in the screen, Paul. Come on, get in the shot. So I'm using white and yellow ochre, both very opaque colours. The burnt sienna is a little bit more transparent, but as I say, really all I'm seeing here is really a reflection. So I'm just going to go in with some lighter colour here and just bring in that nice colour. And all of this wants to be painted fairly flat. That's better. I've adjusted the camera there so you're more in the shot. And so remember that everything you're painting here is now on a flat level pane or a flat level surface. So all of your brush strokes want to be really going nice side to side. So you're laying down a nice colour. And I don't want to kill off some of this darker colour in here. I want it to look like it's a nice reflection of what's happening above of that, as I need to do. The trees, as I say, I'll paint those in probably. I might even leave those till tomorrow, let this firm up a little bit, even do it the day after, so I'm not going to end up making a bit of a smudge. But I do want to blur them slightly because they are supposed to be a reflection. Now, let's move on to another colour. I see a nice dark green grey colour in here. I think I can get this brush back to work. I'm going to go into a little touch of sap green, and the Payne's grey. I want to be a nice dark green colour here. You can see it's very transparent on a white palette. You can move it out the way, you can see the difference. That you can't see the white of the palette, this you can. These colours, when you paint them over the tops of those rocks, look, you can see all the rocks through the detail that we put in. So all the effort we put in, all still there. got some little darker ripples in here. And try not to bump too much into those other colours there, because remember they're opaque and you will soon get yourself into a muddy mess. So get in, do a couple of little ripples, and then leave it alone and go play somewhere else, maybe over the other side. Cad yellow, it's an opaque colour. Not transparent, but I can tint my colour, make it a bit limey. Again, there's a few little limey bits and pieces in here, maybe from the hillside. Let's zoom back out. Ooh. So maybe that little piece of the hillside there maybe had a little bit of a lime effect here. Drop a bit of that in. And there's a few little limey bits over there as well. Now, it's very tempting to try and do something with these ochre coloured stones, and you can paint them on again. You can add to them, but you can't glaze very well with ochre. You see the effect; it's just create this sort of completely opaque colour. It's the reason why I painted them in acrylic, because I don't intend to touch them very much. In fact, if I can get away with not touching them at all, I'm just going to let them be. You can use just the colour of the underpainting to do the job for you. And I'm going to just skip over them, and then I'm going to carry on adding some glaze here instead. And once I've done that, I'll stand back and have a look. And if I think I need to do anything to that section of my painting, I will do. If it needs a bit of a tone down or a tone up, I can do that. But right now I'm just sort of working on this sort of palish green colour. So there's kind of like layers matching what's happening above. So I'm going to just drop in a pale green colour in here. Sort of sludge green, isn't it? A little more sap. Yeah, let's go with that. Again, remember we're painting the surface of the water here. So, after a bit of a stand back, of course, I had to fetch Terry. I said, "What do you think?" She said, "Fantastic." She said, "Why did you paint a steam train back there?" I said, "It's not a steam train." She said, "It looks like a steam train." And of course, she's right. I think it was this that was the confusion. It just looked like some nice steam or smoke coming up from a nice steam train, the railway track along the edge of the water. So I might go back and play with that a little bit more. And I just strengthened up a couple of these lines in here. I went back and just added a few more little ripples in here. So just small adjustments to make it look something similar to the reference picture. I'll pop that up in the corner there. But it's time to move on to this section here, the bit I've been really looking forward to. So let's work on that bit next. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, and you should have watched lots of them by now, you'll know that something like this represents a fabulous chance for me to use my fingers. I love to do this sort of work using my fingertips. I think you can get the loveliest, softest blends with your fingertips. And I just want to blue this up a little bit and have this fade away. So this is it's just slightly glassy looking, just slightly blue, but it wants to be graduated very, very gently. And of course, we'll be using something which is blue-white. So you can see that these stones look a little opaque. So in other words, this is going to work very well for us. Put my picture back on this little stand. Right, I'm going to take a little bit of titanium white, tiny touch of the cobalt blue, looking for a nice soft blue-white colour. I have blue-white on my fingertips. And let's work that into my painting now. I'm probably going to start over here at the side. Give that a little bit of a tester first. Bearing in mind that my canvas is obviously still oily wet. And maybe a little bit over here as well. Let's give this a try. I think that's not far off. Now, if the colour isn't right, if cobalt blue isn't the right blue colour, it's absolutely no problem to switch colours if you wish to. If you've got phthalo blue and you think that's a better fit, then please don't feel as though you're tied to using a colour just because I used it somewhere else in my painting. I think that looks pretty good to me. But again, I only really know when I stand back. Don't forget, still keep it flat, keep it nice and level. Now, one thing I probably will be doing by painting here is to put a few little ripples across the water, because I know this is supposed to be a mirror image of what's happening above, a fabulous reflection, and I think there's a few clues that this is supposed to be a reflection, but sometimes we need to help the viewer understand a little bit more. So I'm probably going to put in just one or two little ripples here, just to kind of re-emphasize that point. And if I don't like it, I can always rub them out. I'm going to take a little tiny touch of that blue colour on my palette knife, and I'm going to just add in just the suggestion. There's hardly any paint on my knife, and it's mainly that blue colour I'm using here. I reckon that looks pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to leave this alone and go back up here, maybe fix my steam train. There, no more steam trains. After a little bit of a stand back and a look at my reference and look at my painting, I'm not unhappy with the sky. The colour's off a little bit. I think this should be brighter. I think that could just be picked up a little bit. And I think this needs to be a brighter colour as well. It just doesn't have quite that pop. It looks a little dull. And I happen to know that in my paint box I have some cerulean blue, and I think that with a little touch of white may just give me the colour I'm looking for. So let's scoop this up and put a little touch of cerulean blue in it. Cobalt blue is lovely, but it's kind of a soft blue, isn't it? I think that's just a little bit brighter than the colour I used. So let's have a go. Let's have a little, see what happens when we put in some cerulean blue and white. And once again, I know that in the reference it doesn't have these broken edges. I know it's not like that in the reference, but visually, I think sometimes you have to say, you have to tell people a bit more about what they're looking at. Because sometimes, and this is something I think I've said before, people will look at a photograph and say, yeah, I believe that. It's a photograph. Of course it's true. There's nothing fake about that. But then you see it on a painting and you say, nah, that doesn't work. Whoever painted that clearly didn't understand the first thing about how reflections work. So you have to sometimes do these little things just to convince people that you as the artist actually do know what you're doing. So be prepared for that, folks, when you're painting away. Just to have to do some things sometimes just to make your paintings work, so that people understand what they're looking at. Time to work on my rocks and some reflections, and I think we'll be there. I've got a little bit of that blue colour on my brush still, and the edge of this rock is kind of bright. And I'm going to just drop in a few little pops of blue-grey. I mentioned that these don't actually show as reflections in the water particularly. They're kind of quite obscure, but I think you would see something. So I'm going to just drag my brush and remember, flat surface. So you got to do the reflections as a series of flat strokes. Again, it's easy to forget. I nearly did, didn't I? So I nearly made a mistake. Something just a hair brighter. All these little tiny details we add into our painting, they just kind of make the whole painting really work. And my waterline at the back of this rock, of course, is going to be blue-grey. It's not going to be bright. So bright at that side and getting darker around the back. So all I really want to do is just to drop these in. Again, I'm going to just blur these slightly. Quick dry clean that brush. This is just to knock out any of that really wet oil. Sorry, that really wet dark paint. So I just want a brush which is pretty clean. And just literally with a flick of the brush here, just see if we can just turn these into. Yeah, I think that works a little better. Yeah, I don't think I need to do very much more to this. I think I could probably end up breaking it right now. So I'm happy enough with that. I might come back and have a little fiddle with it again, but I don't think I will. I think I'm kind of, that's so far back in the painting, I don't need to do anything with it. But I will, with my palette knife and a little bit of light colour, I will add in a little waterline. Not pure white, folks. There we go. I think that's it. I'm going to sign it, call it finished. So you have it, a lovely painting, lots of super reflections, and I hope lots of tips and tricks to help you improve your own paintings. But don't move, because there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. More pro tips. Happy painting, people.